If you're looking for the best webinar software, well, so have I been. And today we're reviewing a tool called BigMarker. BigMarker was recommended to me by many viewers as I started publishing my webinar software reviews. So I gave it a look, and it is a bit mysterious, especially at first. I wasn't quite sure, like, where does this fit in? Is this good enough to get a recommendation? And if so, what exactly is it recommended for? So let's take a look at what BigMarker does, some of the things it does well, some of the things it doesn't do so well, and then I'll give you a conclusion about whether you should use this for your webinars and live streams or not. Let's start by taking a look at the dashboard in BigMarker, and this is what we see. We have some tutorials that greet us on the dashboard, and we see any webinars that we've already scheduled or any open conference rooms that we have ready to go. Let's get right into creating a webinar. And here you can see there are a lot of options. So we have these options. We can create a live webinar, which is just a regular webinar. We can create an on-demand webinar, which is essentially an automated webinar, but it's scheduled. So, people can sign up to it like a normal webinar, but it's basically available for them to watch right after they've signed up. So it's more like kind of a mix between an auto webinar and just a video that you can watch online. Then we have the automated webinar, which is a webinar that seems like a real webinar, but it's scheduled at a specific time, and it plays as a video with some automation features that we'll have a look at. You can stream to Facebook or YouTube. You can do a series of webinars, so pre-scheduled in advance. You can do an Evergreen webinar, which is an automated webinar that is meant to be integrated in a marketing funnel, where the availability of the automated webinar depends on basically where someone is in your funnel. So you can set it up so that whenever someone lands there, there's always a webinar waiting for them next week or something like that. And you can do what they call a 24/7 webinar, which is really just a conference room. So you can create a conference room that you can jump into at any time to have online meetings. Let's look at further settings by going into what I would say is the default choice, which is a live webinar. Here we have all of the usual options, right? We can name our webinar, we can schedule it, and we can either make it public or we can make it private so that only people with a link can find it and attend. There's also options for paid webinars, so you can charge directly for your webinars, or you can even make it optional and just invite people to donate, so it can be kind of a pay what you want webinar as well. Next, we have a choice of landing pages. So you can create your registration page, thank you page, and so on within BigMarker. And this is something I really like. We've seen in some of the other reviews, various webinar platforms that offer you different landing pages, but often there's only like 2 or 3 different ones, or they all look the same, or they all look like crap. This is much more of a real choice where you actually have a good selection of really different looking landing pages. So for different purposes, for different brands and so on, you can really find something, or you're more likely to find something here that matches your brand. And I really appreciate that this looks like, a real selection of templates. It's not just an afterthought. Let's choose one of these and look at some of the editing options. This here is the landing page editor. And the way it works is that, first of all, you've got your basic kind of branding where you can either choose one of these colors or add your own. So you can just apply your brand color to, in this case, the buttons and headings. And then you can edit or hide these specific sections. So this is not a drag and drop editor. It's not a very advanced editor. You can choose one of the templates, and then you can go here. For example, if we go into About, you can put your text in here, or you can choose to hide that section. But there are enough sections and enough options and enough templates here that I think you can create whatever template you need. And there's also enough of a selection here for it to be really conversion optimized. Again, it's not just an afterthought. It's not just a GoToWebinar or Zoom style page with a couple of fields and you can add a bit of text, but it's never going to be a high converting page. Here, it gives you enough options for it to be a high converting page if you fill this out with good copy. Once the webinar is created, this is the webinar dashboard, and this is a bit overloaded. It's just, there's so many options here. But I think it's not poorly done. It takes a bit of getting used to. And ultimately, if you're a power user especially, you'll appreciate all the different things you can do here. But I have to say, it can be a bit overwhelming. We have a whole bunch of tabs across the top, and then all these links where you can do things like configure your pages and the SEO settings and social settings of your pages. You can get your links here to share. You can also use BigMarker to send out invitations. And this is something I'm a bit torn about, because on the one hand, okay, they have integrations with various email marketing tools and with payment tools, and you can use BigMarker to send out invitations and basically take care of all the emailing. You can also create and schedule all your reminder emails and all of this kind of stuff. So it can be highly automated. But one of the reasons why this feature basically fell flat for me right away is that I had to email a segment of my list and not just the entire list. What you can easily do is you can basically connect this to your mailing provider and use BigMarker to send the email. But what you can't easily do is select only a segment. And so in that sense, it's not as useful as it might first seem, because ultimately it's just much easier for me to go into my email marketing tool and send the email there instead of, importing and exporting contacts and all this kind of stuff. So I found that a bit less useful, and I think it's a pity that they don't have a one-click registration link feature that you can use in your own email marketing tool. They only have one that you can use in the built-in email sending tool. So not a huge fan of that. But apart from this, I like pretty much everything in here. Here you can also prepare your webinar with offers you want to show, handouts, videos, files, and so on that you want to show during the webinar. You can embed the registration widget on your own website and basically do everything. It does give you an overview once you get used to this over everything you need for your webinar. Now I'm going to do what I usually do, which is on this screen, I'm going to be the webinar host, and on this other screen, in a different browser, I'm going to pretend to be a guest on my own webinar so that we can take a look at this experience from both sides. So as the host, I can join by telephone audio. That seems very outdated these days. Or I can join by computer, which is what we're usually going to do. And here I can do my testing. So I can test my webcam and see that it chooses the right one. And do all my testing. It also gives me a speed test, which is good. And then when we're ready, we continue into the webinar room, which looks like this. As the guest, here's our landing page, and here I can enter the webinar. And the guest will then see this waiting screen until the host actually starts the webinar. So as you can see here, I have the start webinar button, and it even gives me helpfully a countdown to the scheduled start, so I don't have to be looking at my clock or anything like that. So that's great. Now, here's what we have. We have this panel here with our chat, Q&A, polls, handouts. We have the host panel where we have various options. So for example, if I only want private chat, I can turn that on or off here. And I can turn on or off various webinar features right here. I can also choose what to do with the recording. Let's start the recording right away. And there's also various automation options. I haven't set any of those. We'll take a look at those later. So this is kind of the advanced host panel. This, we can collapse this. This is the panel we'll mostly be working with. Plus we have some options across the top. So with that, let's start the webinar. Here we have another countdown. So BigMarker really helps us prepare before we get started with a webinar. Interestingly, it does not let me start early, so it will not open the room to attendees before the countdown actually reaches 0. This is just something you need to know about. I usually enter the room and start interacting with people like 10 minutes early. In BigMarker, I cannot do that. Once we're in, this is what we see, and as you can see, the views for the host and the attendee are almost identical. We have the same basic interface here, and the admin just has this additional settings thing that we looked at before, plus the options across the top. Now let me populate this with a couple of things so we can look at more details. This is what it looks like when, as a host, I'm sharing my screen. And as you can see on the host side, it gives me this small preview of the screen I'm sharing with stop sharing and switch screen as an option. And then for the attendee, they have a larger view of this. Another thing we can see here right away is that the quality on the screen, the quality of the screen share is very, very poor. It's starting to get a little better because the screen isn't moving. But considering that I'm on an Ethernet connection here, on a very fast connection, this should be, we should never have a grainy mess like we had in the beginning. So that is a bit of an issue. Another thing that's important to note for the host is that we have some options here. So for example, I can switch the location of my webcam, but this is something that only affects my own view because the attendee has the same option. So the attendee can also choose where they want the webcam to appear, but it's important to realize that you have these options. You can move this stuff around, but you have to know that for your attendee, this isn't the same thing isn't happening. Now let's look at some of the communication and engagement features. Here we have a chat window. So as an attendee, I can type a chat message and that will appear, and you can choose for this to be private or public chat. And you can also, as an attendee, you can also raise your hand and that will simply show up here. In the host view, you can have a chat with just the presenters or other hosts. You have a private chat and public chat in a separate tab here, which I think can be a little confusing actually. So it's good to turn one of those two off. You can also monitor Twitter for specific hashtag or something like that. You can tell people to tweet, and this could be useful for live streams, for example, and also to just generate some more engagement. So I think this is a cool additional feature. Then if I am asking a question as an attendee, I can mark it as a question. It just says add to Q&A here, or I can go into Q&A, into this tab, and ask a question right here. This will show up as questions and you can vote. So as an attendee, we can upvote questions, and this is great because it means that you can encourage people, you can tell people, listen, ask your questions in the Q&A tab and vote on the questions you want me to answer. This is a great way to not be overwhelmed with questions and messages, and basically you can tell people I'm going to answer the 10 most upvoted questions or something. I think this is a great feature. I like this very much. I think the way it's implemented with the different chat tabs, there's basically too many different places where someone can add a message, and it can be a bit confusing. So I think the way it's laid out, the way it's done, it's not my favorite, but it's good that these features are here. Then let's take a look at polls. So as a host, I can launch a poll and we can go, is this a question? And I can either add this to my queue. So when I prepare the webinar, I can do this, or I can immediately launch the poll. Here's what it looks like. As a host, I start the poll, and on the visitor side or on the attendee side, it appears as a popover. So it's very attention grabbing, and you can really basically make sure that everybody sees this. You don't have to tell people, oh, scroll down, find the thing with the poll, right? This is really good. So you can time your polls, and they're very attention grabbing front and center. I really like this. So then you can submit the question, and then in the polls, you can see the results both as an attendee and as a host. But the main thing here is you can time them, and they're in your face. I really like this as a polling feature. It's too bad that you can only have one question at a time. It's not a more advanced quizzing feature like we've seen in some other solutions, but it's a good implementation. You can also provide handouts where people get a download link for something. And strangely enough, in a different place here, up here, we have offers, which is an important marketing feature. So you can make and display offers during the webinar. So you can prepare these offers, and when you click on send, you can choose two ways to display them. Let's look at both of them. We have the full screen. Once I click this, it appears like the poll did before, basically as a popover, almost blocks the view to everyone else. Strangely enough, both on the host and the attendee side, but I guess that's to give you a representation of what your attendees are seeing. And you can change the image and you can change these lines of text, but you can't add much here. You can't really customize this very much. And this is just a link that goes to wherever you want. The problem with this is that it essentially forces the visitor to make a choice, to either click on that button or to dismiss. And if they dismiss the popover, it's just gone. So the same is for the other type. Let's look at the other type. Once again, we go to offers, and we have a slide out that comes from the side. I'll also show you different ones, so you can have multiple ones. You can have different designs and layouts. This is what the slide out looks like. So this slides in from the side. This doesn't obscure the view as much, but still the choice is basically either do this now, and it does block the view enough for it to be kind of annoying, right? So then once I dismiss it, it's just gone. This, I think, is a real missed opportunity. So it's good that you can make these offers, and it's close to being a good feature. The problem is that the way this is implemented is not compatible with what, in my experience, is how webinar selling and webinar buying works. Right? On a webinar, it's not that I get to a point where I say, hey, here's the offer, click on the button, make a purchase right now, and then most people do that. Especially if we're talking about a high ticket offer, right? If I'm selling a $1,000 course or something, people are not going to make a snap judgment and buy this thing right away. So if I put a popover offer right in everyone's face and they can't continue watching the presentation unless they get rid of this thing, most people will get rid of it. And the way buying on webinars works is that you make the offer and then you keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. You keep pitching and you keep answering questions, you keep answering people's objections and so on. And gradually you start winning people over. And that's why an offer feature where the offer stays persistently visible in some way is much, much more powerful than one like this, where you're almost forcing people to get rid of it and then there's no clear way to get back to it. And because this is on an attendee basis, so as you can see here, the attendee has gotten rid of the offer. As a host, I'm still seeing this. So it's like, once I do this, some attendees will be looking at this offer, some won't. So there's no clear indication for me as like, oh, now I should bring it back or something like that. So it would just be much, much better if this was displayed, for example, over the chat area, or as a bar across the top, or anything where it can be persistent, where I can spend the next half hour just convincing more and more people to make that purchase. In other words, I think the problem is that this offer feature is good for selling, a $5 mug, but it's not so good for selling a $1,000 course, which is more likely to be the thing you're selling on a webinar. All right, a couple more notes about this. You have a slides feature where you can upload your presentation slides. And strangely enough, for a solution called BigMarker, the only way to do any kind of marking or annotating is by going to slides and either loading slides and painting on those, or you can launch a blank whiteboard, and that gives you a canvas to paint on. Here we go. And then we have various choices of what to paint and what color and so on the canvas. But you can only annotate either a blank board that you've created or slides that you've uploaded as a PDF. You can also load video, and I like the way video is implemented here. You can either choose a YouTube video or upload a video file, and it will actually let you pause and play the video. So you can do something like review a video, right? You can play the video for everyone for a moment. We get this interruption here, but that's a one-time prompt. But here we can watch part of the video and I can pause it at a point and make comments about it. And that is a good way to do it. The problem is that it's not quite in sync. As you can see, the timing of when I hit pause is synchronized, but the timing of where the video is not synchronized. So that's a bit of a problem. Let's have a quick look at the automation features in BigMarker, because I think these are worth mentioning. So when you create an auto webinar or an evergreen webinar, you get to a timeline builder interface that looks like this. So I've already filled this with a couple of events, and you can basically choose what will happen at what time relative to the start time. So for example, we have 50 minutes before start time, the webinar room opens, and this makes sense if you have chat, for example, so you can have chat happening in the room. And this would be for an auto webinar rather than an evergreen webinar. So if you expect to have an actual audience there, then you can have an attendee list on, you can have chat on, and so on. And then you have your webinar start time, and you can choose what to do. So you can play a video, that would be your content, and you can add other things like polls. And the way you do this, you just hit this plus right here, and it gives you options. So you can send a chat message, you can create basically timed messages that appear at specific times during the webinar. You can add your handout, you can make these offer pop-ups appear, you can have polls, and you can have videos. And you can also have multiple videos, so you can basically string together several videos. And out of these steps here, if we choose one of these, we have further options. So you can choose when it starts, you can either upload a video or choose a YouTube video. You can choose to play just a portion of the video or the whole thing. And you can basically string together a series of events that can also be happening at the same time. So you can start a video, 5 minutes later while the video is playing, a poll appears, and while that's happening, chat messages appear automatically. And this really gives you a lot of options to build exactly the automated sequence of events that you want. I think this is really well done. It is a powerful builder, but it's also intuitive, right? It's not overwhelming me. It's not like confusing. It's fairly easy to understand how to put together the kind of webinar I have in mind. And I can also then play a test so that I can really test through and see what this is like in practice. So this, I think, is a really well implemented automation feature. As you saw as we went through this, there's a lot of stuff to BigMarker, and I can't in any way give you a whole tour or all of the pros and cons or everything that I discovered during my review without this turning into a 2-hour review video, which I don't want. So there's one thing I want to mention before we look at pricing and start comparing this. And that is, if we go back to the screen that we see when we create a webinar, with all these choices here, I think this is the key point in BigMarker, is that it gives us all these choices, not only here where we can see all these different types of events we can make, but also in how we create our pages, how we build our funnels, how we do auto webinars, how we customize our room. There's just a lot of options in BigMarker all across the board. And in testing this, I found that some things were really well implemented, some things were not that well implemented, and I highlighted some of the things in this review so far. But the key to this is it does many things. It's kind of a jack of all trades. And that's something we need to keep in mind when we evaluate both the pricing and overall the conclusion for this review. So let's look at the pricing, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. Here's what we're seeing in terms of pricing. Let's switch this to month. It starts at $89 a month. That's kind of the lowest entry-level cost. $89 a month paid monthly. That's for up to 100 attendees, and it supports a lot of features, but not the Evergreen. So you can do auto webinars. You can't do webinar series, strangely, but you can't do Evergreen webinars. So for that, you would have to upgrade to the next tier, which is $200 for 500 attendees. And that is, in both cases, basically, these prices are not exorbitant compared to other webinar software, but it's not a steal either. So if you are looking for a relatively small room, then the pricing here is kind of middle of the road. It's not the most expensive option, it's not the cheapest option. Doesn't stand out essentially. If we look at the higher prices and if we switch to annual billing, so we have $300 a month for paid annually for 1,000 attendees, or $120 a month basically for 500 attendees. So again, this is not the most expensive solution. It's definitely cheaper than something like GoToWebinar, but it's also not the cheapest solution. So basically, you're not going to choose BigMarker because of its pricing. So what's the conclusion to all this? If you think back to the thing I mentioned before about this being a jack of all trades, like I said, I think this is the key. Because BigMarker has many things that it does well, it has many things that it doesn't do quite so well, but it's not catastrophically bad at anything. So there's nothing in here that makes it a total deal breaker like we've seen in several of my reviews so far. But then also with the pricing, it's not like you're going to rush to this solution because it's such a good price. So BigMarker is not going to be the best solution for any one thing or any one purpose. But it is the best solution if you need all of these things, right? If you're thinking, what types of webinars and live events do I need to do? And by the way, I have a video and a quiz on this that you can check out if you're not quite sure what the types are that you need to do. But if you're, doing sales webinars, but you're also doing online meetings and coaching, and you also want to do automated webinars, and you also want to do evergreen webinars, you basically want to have a tool that does all of those things, and you don't want to have to pay for multiple tools, then you should take a look at BigMarker. In other words, if you have one specific purpose that you need a software like this for, if it's like, okay, what I do is group coaching, then there's a better tool than BigMarker. If you only do sales webinars, there's a better tool than BigMarker, especially because of the offer problem that we looked at. But if you need the one thing that does everything well and does nothing horribly badly, then this is actually going to be the best solution, because at that point, it might become the cheapest solution. Although it is not the cheapest solution compared to other tools, if you have to get one tool for your group meetings and another tool for your sales webinars and then maybe an add-on for your Evergreen webinars, that cost quickly adds up. And then BigMarker starts looking like a really good deal. So I do recommend BigMarker for this case. If you're basically a power user of all things online live events, then definitely take a look at this solution. And also check the description and text below this video to see if I've already done my massive roundup review where I compare all of the tools I've been testing and give you a final conclusion of which one is truly the best one.